5:30, so we'll call to order this meeting for Monday, August 26th. Jordan, would you give us a roll call, please?
Please respond by stating present. Councilmember Ronayne.
Present.
Faubourg.
Present.
Liebelt.
Present.
Ward.
Present.
Johnson.
Present.
Reinbold.
Present.
Langer. Norvstrup. Mayor Schoeneman.
Here, please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Not aware of any changes, so I would take a motion to approve this week's agenda as printed.
Move to approve.
Second. Got a motion, Reinbold, second Ward. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll be next approving the minutes from the previous meeting, which took place last week, Monday, August 19th. Take a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
I'll second.
Got a motion from Councilwoman Liebelt and a second from Councilman Johnson. Any changes or discussion to be had about those minutes? All right then, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. No one has signed up for the open forum, so we will move along to our consent calendar where we have just 4 items of city business here. We've got a bid date for snow removal services, a hearing date for the capital improvement plan, a couple of lottery notices, and accepting the minutes and reports from 4 various city boards. Someone
Move to
care?
approve.
Second.
Got a motion from Councilman Ronayne and a second from Councilman Reinbold to approve the consent calendar this week. Anyone from the council have anything on any of these items? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Not a single item of old business, so we'll kick it right over to our new business where we've got the presentation of the 2024 City Housing Study Update to receive and place on file. Ken, what can you tell us about our new housing study?
Thank you, Mayor. Scott Knudsen of Community Partners Research Incorporated has recently prepared an analysis of the housing needs of the city of Aberdeen and the surrounding area. Scott's company has prepared previous housing studies for Aberdeen in 2018, 2010, and I believe 2005. He will provide a summary of the full study, and the final draft will be accepted and placed on file.
Welcome, Scott.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Thank you for letting me participate by Zoom tonight. As some of you may have been aware, I'm actually in Europe right now, Prague, Czech Republic, where I'm about 7 hours ahead of you in the time zone. So it's a little after 12:30 at night. And we tried to schedule this when I was back in Minnesota, and we just couldn't make the dates work. And then I had this extended trip. But again, I thank you very much for letting me participate in this way. As Ken mentioned, we do have a long history of working with the community. In addition to those citywide housing studies that we've done, we've also done some project-specific studies for Aberdeen, including like Meadowwood and Jackson Heights. And so we have a long history that we could bring some perspective of past trends and patterns and things like that in the city. So the 2024 housing study was timed so that we could incorporate some of the 2020 census information. Because of COVID and some of the things surrounding COVID, the census didn't really fully come out until late in 2023 with some of the more detailed tables. So we were able to incorporate that. But I do have to caution people that the 2020 census was a bit disrupted by the COVID pandemic in particular. As many of you recall, the timing of the census was April 1st of 2020, and much of the lockdown started occurring in March. And so we've incorporated this information and we've used it, but we've also put in some of our own analysis and estimates and projections into this document. The document itself is about 177 pages long. We condensed it down to about a 13 or 14 page executive summary. And hopefully what you had distributed to you before tonight's meeting was another distillation down to 2 pages and some of the bullet points that I try and address tonight. I do intend to move fairly quickly, but if you have some questions or want to discuss a point further, please interject. We can certainly do that as we go along the way. I'm going to start with the top of the page there, the demographic and projection highlights. Again, we look primarily at the city of Aberdeen. At times, we did incorporate information about all of Brown County when it was relevant, or to give some comparison perspective for the larger region. Second point, the city has continued to grow over time, and we've been able to track this with past studies. As tracked by the 2020 census, the city added an average of 81 households a year between 2010 and 2020. That was slightly lower than the 87 households per year that had been tracked to the prior census from 2000 to 2010. Again, I have reason to believe that maybe there was somewhat of an undercount of households and population if things had been perfectly normal. Some of the colleges and universities had gone to online learning by the time the census was conducted. Some students may have left the community. Some households may not have participated, and it was hard for census enumerators to go around at that time and knock on doors. So in some ways, the data collection may have been light, and the city may have grown at a faster rate. Certainly, I think that the 2020 census, even if what was an accurate snapshot at that point in time, may not be an accurate reflection of current conditions, because a substantial number of housing units have been built in the city since that time. And also the census had reported that there were quite a few vacant units around the community. What we were simply finding in 2024 was a high utilization of existing housing stock. So again, there's reason to believe that some of those units that may have been vacant in 2020 have since been occupied, and the city has continued to build, as we'll discuss further a little bit later on. However, some of the national data sources that we've looked at since 2020, and these are largely private companies that are out there, things like Applied Geographic Solutions, Esri, and Claritas, sources like that are used by banks and industry and businesses in making some demographic decisions. We think that most of those national sources are very light in what they see happening in the community since 2020 through 2024. So instead, we've relied more on the information that we were able to collect at housing starts and occupancy patterns and that type of thing. In our opinion, it's very likely that the city has been adding more than 100 households per year, 100 or more households per year since 2020, based on the construction of new units that are out there, and again, the occupancy patterns that we are seeing. That next bullet down, talking about age progression, we always throw in quite a bit of information about the demographic profile of the community. Again, the trends that we've been seeing in the past, Aberdeen, like a lot of South Dakota, like a lot of the upper Midwest, like a lot of the United States, has a large population of baby boomer generation people. So in 2020, more than 44%, or approximately 44% of all households in the city had a head of household age 55 and older. And that large baby boom generation has been moving through the aging cycle over time, and that has continued to occur in Aberdeen. Now, jumping into those last three projections, or the last three bullets in this section, we've kind of looked at some projection information. Going forward, we used for this update projected annual demand from household growth of about 124 households per year going forward over the next 5 years, or over that 5-year time period, approximately 620 households. Now that, again, is our projection that we have generated, but we think that's a much more realistic projection than anything we could obtain from any outside source. And it is based in large part on the city's past history of producing housing units, which has been very strong, and we see a high occupancy pattern in those housing units. So that becomes the projection that we have used for growth-generated demand. It's also important to realize that there are other demand generators out there for housing. Each year, there's some older housing units that get replaced. Each year, there can be pent-up demand for certain kinds of housing that are not adequately supplied in the local market. And so our actual recommendations for housing unit production are greater than the 620, but the 620 drives a lot of the demand that we see going forward for housing. Once again, much of the expected growth through 2028 will be in the older age ranges, and particularly strong growth will occur among senior-headed households age 75 and older, as the projections point out, through the next 5 years. And again, much of that tracks with that advancement of that large baby boom generation through the aging cycle. The last bullet in this section on demographic and projection highlights was an income. And there is a fair amount of information in this document on income and housing costs, but we just wanted to throw in one bullet here for discussion tonight, which is that the median household income level for renter households in 2022 was approximately $40,500, compared to the median household income for people that were homeowners in Aberdeen, which was closer to $83,600. So continues to be a big discrepancy between people that rent their housing and who own their housing. And again, it's somewhat intuitive. As people's incomes go up, they can spend more on housing, they can buy their housing unit. But again, much of the more moderate to lower income households in your community are in the renter stock or in the renter occupancy housing units. And there you tend to see a greater level of what we call housing cost burden, where people have to apply a disproportionate share of their income for housing. Approximately 36% of all renters were paying 30% or more of their income. And again, that's where a lot of that housing cost burden exists for people with annual incomes, say, under $35,000. I do point out those income statistics are from 2022. That was the most recent information that we had available to us, but it still goes to highlight. So we expect incomes have increased since then, but still there's a significant disparity between owners and renters in the community. Jumping to the next section, some of the housing construction
Scott, I've got a
highlights.
real quick question for you.
Yep,
While we're
go
still
ahead.
in that initial demographic and projection section, you've referred to occupancy patterns a few different times. Can you walk us through the data collection method for your occupancy patterns?
Sure, and I guess I should point out that largely what we were looking at was a rental survey that we did of larger rental complexes in the community. We tried to focus on multifamily properties with, say, 6 or 8 or more units, although sometimes we did collect information from smaller rental properties. And we collected pretty good usable information from a large number of the rental units in the city. And occupancy patterns were high in rental housing. On the owner occupancy side, it's a little harder for us to gauge, but one, I think, indication is that you can look at the number of houses that were for sale in the community, and that number was not very large, like on the multiple listing service. So there wasn't a glut of single-family houses out there for sale that might be vacant, and occupancy patterns in rental housing were very high. In the conventional market rate segment, we were looking at like 2.5% to 3% vacancy at most. And many properties were fully occupied if they were more affordable.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Scott.
Yeah.
Can I ask a
Again,
follow-up
I
question
should.
to that, Mr. Mayor?
Oh, we've got one more question for you before we
Yep.
move on to the housing construction highlights. Councilwoman Folberg, what have you got?
So you actively did a survey, you said, of the higher density resident or apartments, renter spaces. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yes.
And then was there a sample size you were trying to get, or did you just send out as many surveys as you could?
It was a telephone survey, and we actually tried to call every rental property that we could identify that tended to have more than 8 or more units. In some cases, we did not have working phone numbers, or in some cases, we left phone messages and they were not returned. But overall, we did collect information from more than 2,400 rental units of all types in the city.
So when you collected the information, were you collecting it from the owner or the manager or the individual renters?
No, it would be either the owner or the manager, someone responsible for the property. We did not have any information on the individual tenants.
So were there any surveys done of actual renters
No,
or any other citizens?
no, not for this document.
So I guess my biggest question then is how do we know anything, or what do we know or not know is a better way to say it, about like new Americans, refugees, people that might not be, might not have access to housing as easily, extremely low income, unhoused, homeless. Like, how do we know, I guess, about the farthest margins of access to housing from this survey, or what do we not know?
Any information that we would have on those populations would be through what I'd call like a primary data source, like the U.S. Census or the Census Bureau's American Community Survey. There was no effort to collect individual information from individuals, but rather to take statistical information. So we would have information, for instance, on the percentage of the population in the city that may be of a racial or ethnic minority group. And we'd have some information about tenure rates and things like that for those groups, but nothing collected strictly from individuals.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that clarification. Feel free to move right along to our housing construction highlights section.
All right. First bullet there under housing construction, between the years 2010 and 2023, the city was averaging about 146 housing units per year on average. Now that is through new development, new construction. There was no similar information on housing unit losses. So we would expect the net gain in housing to be slightly less than that. But I don't think we've seen any large scale losses of housing in Aberdeen, at least not in recent years. In some of the past, we did have some issues with flood and some of that removal for flood reasons, but I don't think that has been happening to the best of my knowledge in recent years. However, while that longer term average is closer to 146 housing units per year, more recently, over the last 6 years, that annual average was closer to 92 housing units per year. So again, there's no consistency. I mean, it isn't just a linear pattern with housing construction. Some years you see higher, some years lower. And in the last 6 years, it's actually been less than 100 units per year. Still, however, that's some pretty solid growth in the housing stock, and especially if you look back over the last 14 years. Second bullet there, since 2010, more rental units have been created than owner occupancy units over this longer time period. And the city's rental tenure rate has continued to increase. So while most of your households still are homeowners, you do have a fairly high rental rate, but you are a large rental center for the surrounding region. Third bullet, since 2017, nearly all of the new rental units that have been constructed in Aberdeen are what I would call conventional market rate housing, free of any kind of income or occupancy restrictions, other than some of them may be designated for senior occupancy, households 55 and older, that type of thing. But still, they command market rate rents. They are not any kind of subsidized rent or below market rent. These are all what I would call conventional rental units. The last income restricted unit that we could identify in the community, that anything that was targeted towards more affordable housing, would date to the Central Villas project back in 2016. So again, there really hasn't been much of the more moderate or lower income housing constructed through new construction, unless some of the stuff maybe being created in older buildings through conversion or something potentially could have more moderate rents, but there's nothing with any kind of government assistance. During the same time period, the median existing home price in the city has continued to increase. We were tracking sales information for 2023. In that year, the estimated median home sale price for existing houses now is about $209,000. That was up by $59,500 from 2018. And much of that increase, of course, happened in the post-COVID years as demand for housing, single-family ownership housing, had increased and prices were escalating rapidly. I think if we had a sales sample for 2024, we'd obviously see an even higher probable median sale price, but that was the information that we had available to us. The last bullet on this page, in 2024, there does appear to be an adequate supply of lots, and subdivisions for new housing construction. The local developers have continued to bring lots and subdivisions into the market. Most recently, some of that appears to have been helped by a state program, the Housing Infrastructure Finance Program, some state awards that were made, and I believe 3 subdivisions in Aberdeen were participating in that, which was again causing some new lots to be created. So capacity in terms of having lots and builders and that type of thing is not really a limiting issue for the city. Jumping now to the second page, rental housing highlights. In 2024, it is likely that more than 43% of all households, again, are renters. I kind of alluded to this earlier. We would guess close to 57% home ownership, 43% renters. Again, we won't have a true measure of that until the 2030 census gets conducted. But certainly you've seen continued growth in the number of renter households in the community. As we talked a little bit about earlier, occupancy rates remain high in all rental segments. In the conventional market rate, again, we were estimating about a 2.5% to 3% vacancy rate based on the units that we surveyed. Within the affordable income restricted, that vacancy rate was even lower. It is important to point out, though, again, that the city has continued to grow, and yet the supply of tax credit housing and subsidized housing has not grown, as I pointed out, since 2016. And in fact, some of the older projects may have left their subsidy program since that time. So actually the supply of income-based housing, income-restricted housing is actually smaller overall in the city than what we were seeing in 2018, despite continued growth in the community. The last couple bullets in this section deal with specialized senior housing. Since we were there in 2018, there has been no new construction of specialized senior housing, things like assisted living and memory care, that type of thing. That supply has remained fairly static, although there actually have been a few minor losses within certain segments. Some smaller projects may have closed, losing a small number of assisted living units. There was also, I believe, some delicensing of some nursing home beds. So again, that capacity has decreased somewhat, despite the fact that the population of senior citizens in the community has continued to grow. As a result, occupancy rates were generally high in most of these specialized senior segments. There was a proposal, where there is a proposal for a specialized senior complex to be built, but to the best of my knowledge at the time we were doing the research, this had not advanced to the final planning stages or to construction due to the high cost of construction, but that possibly will be an expansion within the specialized senior segments in the future. At this point, I'm going to jump into recommendations unless there's any other particular question people have. Okay.
Scott, Councilman Ronayne has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I was interested in your comment that 43% of all households in the cities today appear to be renters. I'm just curious how that compares regionally and nationally.
You have to give me a second. I can pull up some statistic on the state of South Dakota. You would certainly be higher than other cities in the region, but again, that would be fully expected considering that you are a regional center for that part of the state. You've got, almost all of the specialized senior housing in Brown County, and you've got, the large bulk of any kind of subsidized or affordable housing. And it's also where developers have gone with the larger projects. Let's see, do I have the information here? I guess I don't have it right in front of me when I'm searching for it here, but I think the statewide rental percentage rate was around 30% and possibly even a little bit lower. But again, that's going to be a statewide rate comparing, small towns, rural areas, and that type of thing. Certainly, cities like Sioux Falls and Aberdeen, tend to have higher than average rental rate. So,
thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate that.
Yep. Okay. Some of the recommendations, we tended to group them by rental versus ownership. I'm going to start with those rental recommendations. And this was largely based on our view that the city should target 400 to 450 total rental housing units to be developed over the 5-year projection period that we were looking at. Again, we know this won't be linear. Rental projects tend to come in bunches. Some larger scale projects get built 1 year and not the next. So we've kind of put this into a 5-year production for overall 400 to 450 units. Conventional market rate and production of 40 to 50 units annually, or say 200 to 250 over the 5-year projection period. This is where most of the rental production will occur. And it certainly wouldn't surprise me if more units than this are actually constructed in the city. And the reason for that is some of the other recommendations that we're making are going to actually be hard to produce. So as rental demand grows, most of it will be met by this conventional market rate segment. Number two, we would, however, promote the development of 70 to 80 moderate rent tax credit units. This is the primary federal program that exists out there for more affordable rental housing development. Awards are made annually by the South Dakota Housing Development Authority. And the last time, even though Aberdeen has a strong history of receiving those awards over time, the last one was in 2016, and there hasn't been anything. So that is probably 2 to 3 moderate rent projects. That might be difficult to achieve due to the competitiveness, but as a goal, that would be kind of a target number to try and get to expand that moderate rent affordable housing stock. Number 3, subsidized rental development, set a goal of 30 to 40 units. This is purely an aspirational goal here. There have not been really resources from the federal government to develop subsidized housing in recent decades. You have a waiting list. The Aberdeen Housing Authority has a waiting list of over 500 names for rent assistance vouchers. So if you could actually produce more subsidized units than this, that would be tremendous. But I think a goal, if you could even produce 30 to 40 over the next 5 years, would be quite an achievement, considering that that's hard to produce. A great amount of outside money typically has to go in to drive down those rents to make them affordable for very low income people. Number 4, light services, senior housing. More independent, but where things like a daily meal are offered, emergency call systems, maybe housekeeping, laundry services, that type of thing. Light services housing, 60 or more units over the 5-year projection period. Number 5, 4, 5, and 6 kind of go together because oftentimes these are developed in larger complexes. Assisted living, 40 or more units over the 5-year projection period. Again, assisted living has a high level of care, 24-hour staffing, access to skilled skilled nursing services, those types of things. So that would be another area of expansion. And then number 6, specialized memory care, 35 to 50 beds. This is probably the most difficult nut to crack out of all these specialized senior units. There has not been a lot of memory care housing developed typically in South Dakota. A lot of it has to do with the high cost of development because of the services that are needed, but it also has a lot to do with adequate staffing and the high level of staffing that's required. But again, that is an underserved segment of the local housing market. Ideally, again, you're going to see a senior complex get built that may address some of this demand going forward. Number 7, we talk in here about the opportunities to provide housing with services to lower income seniors. Typically, historically, Aberdeen's providers of specialized care for seniors have been private pay facilities. They will accept a small number of people on county medical assistance, Medicaid, that type of thing, but typically that is very much capped. And so there aren't a lot of opportunities for lower income seniors. Again, a difficult nut to crack. I don't know, you generally are going to need some kind of outside assistance to provide lower income, say assisted living, but that is an area that could be expanded in the city of Aberdeen. We also talked in here about student housing in general. I think what you're seeing is a decrease in the number of students living in Aberdeen who are actually attending classes in Aberdeen. Obviously, you've got the presentation college issue, but aside from that, you also have Northern State, where classes have tended to go more online, some remote campus opportunities, sometimes less and less reason for someone to physically show up in the city of Aberdeen to take coursework. And so with that decline of students are being housed in existing rental projects in the community. As new apartments get built, some students will move into those. Projects near the university tend to be a higher percentage of students, but again, they are generally being served in the general rental market. Last point in the rental, we just talked about innovative efforts to assist renter households. A lot of this has been done in the past by the Aberdeen Housing Authority, things like security deposit assistance and those types of things, some renter education courses. Again, a larger and larger share of your households in the community over time are renters, and a lot of those have fairly moderate incomes. So innovative programs that can be launched to help lower income renters can help that housing situation. Jumping to some of the home ownership recommendations here, we were basing this on an annual demand of about 55 to 60 units. Even though, again, no year may hit exact average, it tends to be a little more consistent on the home ownership side with annual production, or looking at 275 to say 300 single family owner occupancy type units over the 5-year projection period. And by single family, this could be a mix of attached units like twin homes that are for owner occupancy, as well as the traditional detached single family houses. Affordable entry-level homes, number 10 there, promote the construction of 15 to 20 units per year. Again, that is becoming increasingly difficult with rising construction costs. You are very fortunate to have the Happy organization that largely deals with that segment of the market and has continued to produce houses annually in that more affordable price range. Although, again, they are struggling like everyone else to keep it where they would traditionally think of as a starter home for new buyers. Most of the activity in number 11 will continue to occur in what we consider the moderate to higher price ranges. These typically do not require any kind of outside assistance. This is being dealt with by private builders, private home buyers, that type of thing. And it's a match between incomes and housing costs. Demand for 42 units per year within that segment. Number 12, we continue to see growth in demand for that attached single family. It's probably not going to be a lion's share of what gets built going forward, but with a growing population of households 65 and older, we would expect to see continued market share occur from that low maintenance, no maintenance housing option that is out there. Number 13, promote entry-level home ownership in the existing housing stock. Even though we talked about existing house prices rising in Aberdeen, the median sale price of $209 is a much better match to a moderate income home buyer than say a $300,000 or $350,000 new construction, quote unquote, affordable home. And so continuing to promote that existing older housing stock for ownership is important. I don't necessarily like to make value judgments on using single family homes for owner versus rental because both can work. But generally speaking, most communities want to see their single family housing stocks stay predominantly owner occupancy for tax reasons, for stability reasons, for maintenance and repair reasons, and those types of things. And so promoting that entry level homeowner to go into the existing homes can help maintain a higher rate of ownership in the community as well. Continued number 14, continue to utilize home ownership assistance programs. Again, there are different things being offered to happy home buyers. There are different things being offered to people that are buying affordable houses outside of some of the happy subdivisions. Those are an important part of, again, promoting home ownership in the community. I talked a little bit already about 15, a lot of availability and development that appears to be kind of a non-issue right now. Monitoring that to make sure that stays the case over the next 5 years will be important so that there's capacity there to take on new homes. Number 16, continue to utilize infill lots for affordable subdivisions. Again, this is a realm that Happy is taking on when redevelopment sites become available, infill parcels that they can maybe pick up. If you can drop the cost of infrastructure cost and some of that, you can generally provide a more affordable house. And they've been doing that to the tune of, I think, 2 to 3 houses per year. And again, that's an important strategy to continue. It also can help with removing some substandard structures that may get removed in order to create a building site for a new home. 17, continue to support affordable subdivision and home development. Again, that's kind of that happy initiative that we've talked about in the past. And we just refreshed the information on that for this document. The next section, 18 and 19, dealt with rehabilitation and preservation. Again, it's important to realize that most of your housing stock is older housing units. The estimated median year, midpoint year of construction for all rental housing in Aberdeen is 1980. So those houses are, rapidly approaching 45 or more years old, or those units or more years old. And for rental units, that can mean some maintenance repair over time. For owner occupancy houses, number 19, the median year of construction is estimated at 1964. So again, an even older owner occupancy single family stock. Again, that's not to imply that older units always need repair. Some of them are extremely well maintained, historic houses and the like. But generally speaking, the older a house is, the more it requires maintenance and repair. So having rehabilitation programs out there to do that. And again, there are some of those being offered for owner occupancy, not so much for renter occupancy in 2024. The last couple issues that we comment on in this document, again, are refreshing from previous studies talking about some of the downtown housing. And there are a couple of really nice conversion projects underway or soon to start underway, taking older buildings and turning them into rental housing in the downtown area. That is certainly appropriate for the recommendations that we've provided above. And then there is some information, again, back to one of the council members' questions earlier about diversity issues. The 2020 census did not track a large population of racial and ethnic minorities living in the city of Aberdeen. Again, it may have reflected an undercount. It may reflect that since 2020, those populations have continued to grow. But one thing that did stand out is that the home ownership rate among those racial and ethnic minority households was lower than overall for the city. So again, that provides an opportunity to raise the home ownership rate is by working with some of those emerging populations in the community and trying to help them move from rental to home ownership. And that was in a quick summary was the 177-page document. Again, if there's some additional questions or discussions.
Does anyone on the council have any additional questions for Scott? Scott, you made mention of the rehabilitation programs. Are those state programs that are available, or are you just speaking in grand large terms?
I think that Happy has been able to access some state funding for home ownership. I would have to go back to the specific information in here, but they did have some assistance that could be provided, and in both kind of larger scale repairs for some houses, but also then some kind of emergency repairs, like if somebody's furnace went out or something like that, that there could be some assistance that could be provided to people. So there is some out there. It isn't a lot of money that's available, and I think Aberdeen is doing actually quite well with that. They were able to secure some funding through the South Dakota Housing Development Agency and also through the Federal Home Loan Bank, and had deferred payment loans for up to $20,000 that have been available to repair major components such as roofs, siding, windows, and doors. And then, like I said, a smaller program, a smaller dollar amount program for emergency repairs, like if somebody's furnace went out, that type of thing.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions from the council?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Councilwoman Boberg.
Scott, are there recommendations that you make, or would you look at like our zoning map and consider things that we might do as a city to pave the way for some of the recommendations that you've made, or how might those things be connected?
We do not deal with planning and zoning issues. I think you probably got some staff that you could consult on those types of things. We take more of a broad-based look, just to, like I was talking about, that we tried to check on whether or not there was an adequate supply of lots, whether there were some lots in the development pipeline. I have to say, though, I did not look as much at multifamily sites. I guess it was my assumption, based on the fact that you've had continued development of rental housing, that there are adequate sites, but I guess I do not know the answer to that specific question.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. And I will say that we've had some interest from an outside firm in building a low-income housing qualified property, and that's been going through the paces at the very least. So hopefully we will fill that void a little bit in the not-too-distant future. If there's no further questions for Scott, I'll let you get to bed. It seems like it's the middle of the night there in Prague, and appreciate you having joined us tonight, and we will review your document more in depth on our own time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Next, we've got the possible approval of a purchase of a 2024 John Deere compact tractor or track loader, which is actually a skid steer I see here from RDO. Stu, what can you tell us about that skid steer purchase?
Stu is gone, so Robin is going to fill in. It is my understanding that the guys have gone through some comparisons with a lot of different types of equipment. They found that the John Deere that is listed here was the low one that they could access that would fill the needs. They were looking for something a little bit smaller so they could get in under where they wouldn't require some of the additional fluids for the diesel engines, but this is really truly what the size that they're going to need. So they went through the source wall process, which they've done before, and it allows them to compare side by side and make sure that we're getting the product we need rather than just getting a low bid process, and sometimes you're not getting the product you need. So this one is coming in under budget, although at roughly $100,000. That's a big skid steer. You can see that. Our recommendation is to go with the larger of the two that was in this, and also include the warranty with it, which they feel will be beneficial to them. And I believe that was a 5-year warranty that they were getting as well. So recommendation, go with the higher priced one with warranty, and it is under budget.
Move to approve this purchase. Second.
Got a motion from Councilman Johnson, a second from Councilman Reinbold. Does anyone from the council have any questions about this skid steer? I knew that Stu wasn't here. Had it written down to ask him. Anyhow, Jordan, would you give us a roll call?
Councilmember Ronayne,
Aye.
Foberg,
Aye.
Liebelt,
Aye.
Ward,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Reinbold,
Aye.
Langer,
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion carries. Next, we've got the review and approval of our claims and payroll. We've got the bills for this week and the payroll pay period from August 11th through the 24th. I would take a motion to pay the bills.
Move to approve the payroll.
Second. Got a motion from Councilwoman Liebelt and a second from Councilman Ward. Anyone have anything to discuss as it relates to these bills before we take our vote? Jordan?
Councilmember Langer,
Aye.
Reinbold,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Ward,
Aye.
Liebelt,
Aye.
Foberg,
I accept the payment to Dakota Bank.
Councilmember Ronayne,
Aye.
Mayor Shonneman.
Aye, motion carries. Next, we've got our city manager's report. Robin?
Okay, a couple items. I did send out an email to you on Friday regarding the IM28 measure, and I just ask that you look through some of that paperwork and try to process some of those thoughts. We will be asked at some point in time to weigh in on this, however that may look. But I think the more information we get and gather, the better process we'll go through. We did meet with some folks from FEMA and the Corps this past week on a number of different things related to our levee and the floodplain management process in Aberdeen. And it's an interesting process because we went through a deal back, and I think it was 2007, where we took roughly 1,200 homes out of the floodplain by virtue of putting the levee in. And now their new analysis shows probably half of those properties going back into the floodplain. And so we will be investing a lot of time and effort trying to show them what we've done with putting in the systems, the stormwater systems and we'll use the Happy North subdivision as one example. That particular subdivision, along with 20 others or 19 others, we've put in holding ponds, larger lift stations, stormwater piping, all the things, but their analysis does not look at that. So we're going to have to supply them a lot of additional information so that the mapping is accurate. Right now, it's, in my mind, not going to give us the product we need and to show the true risk in the community. So we'll be putting a lot of time and effort into that particular process. It's a little bit frustrating, but we'll get through it. Next thing, we did do a 5-year certificate for Eric Schultz in the fire department. Eric has been on the payroll for close to 12 to 13 years, I think is what he had said. But he did take a short time away and came back. He said he was tickled to be back, and so it's good to have somebody that looked at the other side and decided that working for the city was a good thing. So congratulations, Eric. And I thought I'd have a little discussion about what we went through on Friday in trying to make sure that Mr. Bauer was found safe. And so Chief McNeil, if you'd like, just walk us through the process and just talk about how much of the community was involved in that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. So I just want to say I'm proud and thankful for all the assistance we receive from our first responder agencies in the community. So last Friday morning around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, an elderly individual living up in that refuge retreats area, kind of up on Lancelot, went missing, excuse me, suffering from a cognitive disability. So the family notified us and we began a response. And if you remember that morning, it was pretty foggy. And so it limited our ability to use drones. And if you know that area and that residential area, you have right adjacent to that a lot of rural areas with sloughs and open fields and kind of woodland areas. So we're really concerned, and obviously we want to find the individual. So starting with the call to Robin and mobilizing our first responder groups from our city manager to our public works to our fire department, our county partners, our state partners, the CERT team. We just began a methodical search for the individual, and we got a lot of people that came. The refuge retreats offered us their clubhouse. We used that as a command post, and that really worked well. It was great. One of our staff members who uses our social media, in our command post, we started to put out messages, and we had citizens that came to our command post and wanted to assist. So we had a lot of self-deployment and a lot of organization there. It was just impressive and amazing how many people we could deploy at one time to kind of find this individual. And very fortunately, around 11 o'clock, we did find him. But I was growing very concerned, given Friday morning, with that rush hour traffic, that maybe somebody would have seen him. So it was very concerning. And it was a victory for our first responders in the community to find this individual. And we just have a lot of thanks for all our partners that helped us. So very appreciative to the community, too, for those that just showed up and wanted to help. So very reassuring. From the city manager on down, it was a good response. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that effort. And it was always a major relief for all of us to see that he was found safe. Anything else, Robin?
That's all I have.
Sounds good. Well, without further ado, I would take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
A motion from Councilman Ward, second from Reinbold. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much.